The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? Well, welcome to the Media Roundtable. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One. And I have a few questions. What is a podcast? And how has the answer to that question changed over the years through the explosion of video that we've been seeing and distribution channels shifting? Does it even matter? Or is this a tomato thing? Or is truly there potentially an existential crisis happening in an industry where this thing that we call podcasting, that so many of us have devoted so much of our lives to, may actually be in jeopardy of shifting away from the golden age and the Renaissance that really brought us into it and gave us its power. These are some of the things that we're unpacking in this industry, as in this industry addition to the Media Roundtable that we're calling What's a Podcast, as we explore this. And where we're trying to go with it is we're trying to land on a standard definition. The individual who is joining us today is a titan in the industry. And look, I'll spend the whole hour doing his background if I go through it. But let me just say this. You know, comedians talk about how in the old days, if you got invited to do the Tonight Show and you had a successful set, Johnny Carson might validate you if you really did good by having you come sit next to him on the couch. And if you got to the couch, you knew you had made it. And I would argue that our guest today, Guy Raz, is a parallel in this business where there are business people. I have met countless business people who see how I built this specifically, his program that he developed as a rite of passage. And, you know, I'm going to let Guy talk about it, but just the staggering volume of requests and interests from business people who see his program as the gold standard and a real validation that they have made it in the world, because he has gotten, you know, countless industry leaders across industries to come and really deconstruct what made them successful and how they actually did it in a way that people hadn't really experienced before with this type of media. And so here we are making this ground zero for the conversation about Guy's story, about what brought him to podcasting. And, you know, we're really just trying to figure out how do we keep it going and from all our different corners of the ecosystem, keep it a sustainable thing. So I'm just going to say, welcome, Guy, to the show. Congratulations on everything that you've created and done and contributed to media, to people's lives, businesses, and to this industry that we care about so much. I'm so glad that you're with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that warm introduction. I've always feel a bit uncomfortable when I'm described as a titan, but I guess it's also another way of saying I've been in podcasting for a long time. So maybe dinosaur is another description. But it's great to be with you and great to see you virtually this time, not in person, but of course we've had some time to spend together, and it's always great to see you.
We have indeed, and it's so cool because the nature of it's not the I know that with Wow in the World and some of the other content you create, it's not all business content, but the fact that you know so many businesses and business models so intimately gives you such a great perspective. And when we got together a couple years ago at our chief audio officer event, I can't tell you how much it impacted the audience who was there, who were all trying to make smart business decisions and know how to grow, and the framework that you bring to it. And the one thing that I really that stuck with me was something that happened before we had the kind of in front of the audience conversation behind the scenes, when I saw how serious you were about your prep and your notes, even for something that, look, I've done enough of these things, you've done enough of these things, it's easy to just show up and blow that stuff off. But how thoughtful and meticulous you were, because you really care about product, you care about process, and you've applied that to manufacture content that is groundbreaking. So I'm glad you're here to share it with us now. But look, enough about you. Let's talk about something maybe you're more comfortable with, which is this industry that I think it's safe to say we both love so much. I want to hear about when Guy met podcasting, and really kind of, I would imagine that, like me and like many others, there was a bit of a romance with the medium. So can you just talk about how that came about for you?
Yeah, I wanted to start a podcast back in the day when you had to plug your iPhone into your computer and transfer the podcast to your iPod or whatever it was, your iPod, back in the day when it seemed like it was not going to take off. In fact, at the time, this is probably going back to like 2009, 2008 even.
Hmm.
I remember I was at the time working for NPR. I had worked for CNN, I worked for NPR. At the time I was working for NPR, and I pitched an idea to do a show, a music show. And at the time, NPR was allowing anybody to just, kind of experiment with this. If they, not everybody, but most people who wanted to experiment with it, but it never went off, never got off the ground. And I remember hearing at the time a lot of people talking about how that medium was never really going to take off because there was so much friction. You had to plug your phone or your, iPhones had just come out. You had to plug your iPod into a peripheral and then download the audio to your computer and then transfer it to your, iPod, and then you could listen to it. And so it was clunky, and there wasn't really much enthusiasm about it. Fast forward to 2012 when I was sort of at my wit's end, working for in news. I was working in news. I was working for at the time NPR. At the time it was a major media organization. Today less so. And I just wasn't news wasn't something that I was feeling passionate about anymore. I felt that there was so much context that people were missing from the news. I think that's very clear today. When you turn on the TV or you read a newspaper, and I was feeling that in 2012. Also at the time, I was sort of at a crossroads because the sort of the traditional path for me at that time would have been to try and be the weekday anchor, of one of their news shows, and because I was a weekend anchor, and I wasn't selected. I
Hmm.
tried to be that person, and wasn't picked. And so I was sort of kind of looking around to figure out what I was going to do with my life, in 2012. And I'm in my 30s and thinking I'd been in media since I was 22, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And I was living in Washington D.C., and I really was looking around for any kind of opportunities. And I heard about a potential opportunity working with TED, the company that makes TED Talks. They'd experimented with podcasting a little bit, but they hadn't really had any success. And they were trying to figure out a way to create a successful podcast. And so I found out that they were trying to do this. And I kind of raised my hand. I said, I think I can make something here. I had worked with a really great creative group of young producers when I was a host on the weekend host on NPR. And I went through several rounds of interviews, and they hired me. So I basically, that was the beginning of my time with the show called TED Radio Hour. And that was in, 2012. We started working on that show. Now remember, Dan, this is like leaving, leaving news, leaving like a national news magazine program to go into a podcast was like exile at the
Yeah.
time. Like
Yeah.
people
Yeah. Yeah.
people that I knew at that organization, NPR, literally famous people, probably as well known today, but were saying to me, like, who listens to podcasts? Like, who's going to listen to? I remember, a very well known NPR correspondent sending me an email saying, who's going to listen to one topic for an hour? Because my sort of the way that the TED Radio Hour was kind of described wasn't really what it was, but my vision for it was as as sort of a show that was kind of multidisciplinary. We would take a topic like creativity, or where does wonder come from? I mean, very sort of human scale questions,
Mm-hmm.
and we would talk to all kinds of people. Somebody who's in prison, somebody who was a highly regarded academic, maybe a celebrity. People who've given TED talks related somehow to this question: Are we crazy? Where does insanity come from? Just really exploring the human experience and the human mind. What is happiness? And so initially, there was this kind of feeling that I was getting from other people in that world that like, oh, well, there's, he couldn't make it in news, couldn't make it here, so he's going into this weird like podcasting thing. And to be honest, I didn't disagree. Like in my mind, I thought, this is probably like, a step, sort of a transition, and then I'll figure it out.
So
But
you
lo and
didn't really
behold,
feel confident. You didn't really feel confident that this thing was going to turn into
I wa
anything
I
like
wa
it
I
did.
was not it was not clear to me that this was going to be something that was gonna blow up. I mean, it was just 2012 it was the early days, of
Yeah.
the sort of the next wave. And we launched the show, and very quickly, it started to get significant numbers of listeners. I mean, not as many as I was getting on the radio,
Mm,
remember, even
mm.
in 2012, but slowly but surely we were getting more and more people, and there was a different kind of listener. I remember I would host the weekend a news show on NPR, and apparently, I mean, they claimed that 3-4 million people listened to it. I don't know about the veracity of those numbers now, but that was what they were claiming at the time. And I would never hear from anybody. You would never get any feedback. You'd get emails from like cranky people. All of a sudden, I'm doing this podcast, and we would get the most intimate, warm, intense emails and notes from people who were deeply affected by these shows we were doing. That it was having a different kind of impact, because when I was doing the news, people are just mad. They're just angry. They're reacting to like, oh, why are you covering it this way or that way? Or why didn't you tell this story or that story? And I didn't, that's not why I got into this business. Like, I got into this business to make an impact and hopefully to inspire people. All of a sudden, we're doing shows that are inspiring people, and people are writing in saying, wow, this has really changed the way I look at the world. And that was a switch that went off in my head. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to make things that inspire people, that give people a reason to look at the world in a different way, and a reason to want to create and innovate and build and think in a bigger way. And I had come from a world, that when you work for a news organization, you're kind of channeled to think of the world in a very narrow way. You're,
Yeah.
you're around the same kind of people, you're in Washington, D.C. or New York City, and it's just a very narrow way of looking at the world, like through the lens of a news person. And all of a sudden, I'm out of that world, and I'm able to look at the world in this much bigger way. I started coming to California, seeing people on the West Coast, meeting people who are building businesses, and
Yeah.
it just changed my world and changed my life. And that was really the start. I mean, I went into podcasting kind of accidentally, and I was present at this sort of boom that begins around 2014 with Serial, and really with Serial, but then other shows that followed.
Well, so let's go back to this word inspire. do, do you believe that there is something about the vehicle that puts it in a unique position from other ways that we might classify types of media that lend itself to content that is actually inspirational instead of just like feeding your outrage and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, well, let me just kind of acknowledge that it can also feed your outrage, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of podcasts out there that do a really good job at communicating ideas that you might identify with, and that for some of us that might be outrage, or it might be, it might confirm our views. And so podcasting does that very well also. I think on the question of like making inspiring content or being able to inspire you, and there's a lot of really great programs that do that. I think it comes down to two things. One is voice, and the other is, in general, an absence of images. So now, of course, a lot of people consume podcasts by looking at them, and that's also a different topic, and I'm sure we'll get there. But when you're, like when I take a walk, right? When I have a chance to take a walk during the day and I'm listening to a podcast,
Mhm.
um, I'm really present and I'm connecting with that person's voice. So when you're listening to me on my show, even though there might be, a million people who might hear that episode over a period of time or more, I'm only talking to you. And that's the connection there is so different, because when you're absorbing information just through your ears, like most of the time we absorb information visually, like 80 or 90% of our brain power is processes images. It's like we're this incredible computer. I can turn left and right, and all of a sudden I'm just seeing everything in real time, the details of everything around me. That takes so much energy and brain power. But when you're just absorbing something through your ears, your brain is now building the picture in your mind of what's happening. Some of it's abstract, some of it's very clear. When I'm telling a story on how I built this, it's very deliberately designed to be like a movie in somebody's mind, because I know that most people are consuming it in their ears or in their cars. And so there's this very intimate connection. You pick up on like not just turns of phrase, but cadence and inflection and pauses. These are all ways that we communicate, but we don't assimilate that information because, like, most of the time, we're looking at somebody's face, and in our face there are like a thousand or thousands of muscles, and so our face just constantly communicates ideas, and that's where we receive information. But when you just focus on the voice, you're getting a whole different layer of information. And so I think that's one of the reasons why podcasting is so powerful. Any kind of audio, an audiobook, it can be so powerful because voice communicates things that we don't often assimilate on a day-to-day basis. So when it comes to like how I built this, I'm not like consciously every day saying I need to inspire. I mean, we really do think about it in a very sort of holistic way. But when I get excited about someone's story, we just told a story. It hasn't, it may air by the time this episode airs, about the guy who founded the litter robot, a kitty litter box that has revolutionized. It's a $500 million a year in annual revenue.
Wow.
And he started it, with $35,000 in 1999, and it took 15 years for them to hit like $5 million in sales. Like, it was a grind. And he had to subsidize the business by doing outside consulting. And it's so inspiring. Like, this is just a Midwestern guy who just tinkered in his garage. And for me to hear that story, I know it. I've gone into the interview very prepared. But then to really pull it out and to hear it in real time, I'm so inspired, and I can transmit that through the way I'm responding to him. And I think that's what listeners also get inspired by. It's like, wow, that wow moment that you get when it's just you, your ears, and the person's voice coming through into your ears.
So let's talk. Let's go into the visual piece further here, because you're probably seeing a lot of pressure. Well, I think the whole industry is seeing pressure to program toward the multiple distribution platforms, right? Spotify and YouTube among them, really prioritizing video and motion. How do you respond to that, and how do you think about that?
I think it's an evolution. I mean, I think like in any industry matures and grows and innovators come in, it changes, and you have to respond to those changes. I mean, if you look at early YouTube, it's so different from what it would become over time. It's becoming different now than what it was 5 years ago. So I understand what's happening now around video podcasting. I mean, in one of my shows, The Great Creators, we do videos on how I built this. We're evolving to that as well. I mean,
So you are moving in that to think about how to do that. Yeah, that's so fascinating.
We do video all of our How I Built This interviews are videoed, and currently we sort of cut that up for social media
Right,
conversations.
right,
Um, I think that the in-studio podcast interview is really interesting because, look, it's like Charlie Rose, or, I mean, if you think about Charlie Rose, it was Charlie Rose and somebody else in a black box dark studio. There was no background. It was just two faces and it was black and dark. And that show was highly popular for a long time. I mean, the difference between what the Charlie Rose show was in the 80s and 90s, 2000s is no different than a podcast today. It's just made more accessible because now it's available on YouTube and multiple channels. So I think it to me, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of people want the visuals. But I do think I still listen. I don't watch podcasts. I still listen to
right,
them, even if they're
right,
available as visuals. But I do think you know, it's, it makes sense to me because I see especially how my kids consume content or information, and it is entirely through video. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, we got the LA Times every day, and I was on the dining room table, on the kitchen table. I'd read it every day. I read the sports page, the funny pages, and then as I got older, I'd read the news. And um, my
remember
kids
libraries?
have libraries. My kids know a lot about the world. Some of it of questionable, it's questionable, the veracity of it,
Right,
but they're really savvy. They do actually. One of my kids is really into history, and he
mhm.
watches a lot of history videos. The Green brothers have been pioneering this for a long time, so I think that it makes sense why there's a push to get into video because it really does appeal to a different, especially younger type of content consumer.
Well, and so what I'm hearing you say is that, and a lot of the definitions that I think we're hearing people suggest say that, look, it's on demand, it's episodic if it's a podcast, and it's audio led, meaning you can turn off the camera and it holds its value. You don't need to be watching to get it. And it sounds like we're seeing the same thing, which is, look, you can't fight what's coming, right? Like, we have to adapt and evolve to the marketplace that prioritizes the visual, but we don't have to change our approach. And that's just an extra feature that people can opt in on to use or not. But the voice, I'm hearing you say, tell me if this is accurate, the content value is not diluted if you stay focused on the conversation rather than look at this.
100%. I mean, look, there are going to be some exceptions. There are going to be some shows that are that where the visuals are critical, and it's been around for a while. ESPN and other sort of like kind of morning zoo kind of DJs have done this for a while, where they've
Yeah.
videoed their conversations, and then and then eventually they would make that into a podcast. But it was still, there were like hijinks in the studio, and it'd be more interesting to watch it. I will listen to, like, oftentimes I'm in my car and I've got Sirius XM, and I'll put on Fox News or I'll put on CNN. I change back and forth between them depending on which one's running ads. So sorry, I
Yeah.
shouldn't say that to you, Dan,
No,
but
it's fine. I
I
get
go
it.
back and forth, because if I want to hear news, I'll go Fox, CNN, back and forth. And oftentimes, and very, very often, it doesn't work just to listen because, they'll say, you're looking at the pictures now. And as you can see, blah, blah, blah. And they're focused on the viewer, and that makes sense. Like, I don't think the anchors on Fox or CNN are like, oh, we got to speak to the Sirius XM crowd too.
Mhm.
But I think that, it's, um, so as a listener, it doesn't always work. But I do think that when podcasts, like, you can listen to Joe Rogan and you don't have to watch it because he's not saying like, why are you giving me the finger? Like, there's nothing happening in the studio that is critical for you to watch,
Mhm.
but it can be really entertaining to watch if you want to, but you don't need to. And I think that the best podcasts are doing that. Like, they understand that it works either way. And in fact, you really don't need the visuals, but the visuals is just another way to consume it. And so, yeah, that's my feeling. I mean, I think, and I think that's the same with How I Built This, or the great creators. I mean, occasionally I will, if there's something in the studio that I have that's a prop, it's very rare. I'll describe it, but I work really hard to describe things visually, like even when we're talking about a product or some component that somebody was working on, because I think that when you can translate that for both visual and oral, consumers, you're basically potentially doubling the size of your audience.
Yeah. Well, and look, I was in radio for 10 years and I saw podcasting as the evolution that solved what radio could not do because it was so limited. You couldn't actually have a commercially successful radio show that went too deep into a subject because you had to play the hits even in the spoken word and talk about immigration or whatever the buzziest political stories were. It's really all you could talk about if you were going to be successful. Podcasting opened that up. As we're talking about this, the evolution into video, what many people are saying is that it's not so much the visual benefit as it is the promotional benefit. The fact that you can actually do something that podcasts failed to do through audio, which is be able to chop up clips and introduce the samples to people in a way that helps your show spread as easily. And I wonder, in your view, we know what the benefits are, right? More distribution, giving people what they want and the option to get it the way they want it. Sometimes they can work in a benefit with the images, but is there something lost to the listener, to the audience, as this industry starts to cater toward the visual?
It's hard to answer. I think that it's a sign of a very maturing industry when these questions get asked,
Yeah.
because it means that the old guard, right? And I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm probably one of those people. Is their way of doing things is being challenged, and I think that's healthy for one thing. I
Hmm.
think that watching, very young people come in and really do well and find an audience with shows that I might not appeal to me, or I
Hmm.
might not fully understand, is also really interesting, because that's the reality of any maturing industry. And so I think that, the reality in any medium, whether it's Netflix or going to Hulu or Apple or listening to a podcast, is, for most of us, there is what seems to be unlimited content out there, and there is, but it doesn't mean that there's unlimited good content.
Right.
You know, there's just an infinite variety of things to pick from, right?
Hmm.
But most of the time, I have a hard time finding things I want to watch on Netflix,
Right.
because I'm like, nah, no, no. I will start tons of things, and 5 minutes in, no, not for me. And I think that it's the same with audio. There are infinite podcasts out there, but just, a very small percentage that are really high quality, that are shows where people will derive value from. And when I say value, I don't mean like they're going to walk away more intelligent or more informed. Like, they might walk away just being able to laugh. It might
Yeah.
just have been a really funny hour, and that's value. But it's hard. Comedy is really hard to get. To write good comedy is extremely difficult. To entertain people for an hour is really hard. What we do on How I Built This, we're not smarter than anyone else. I'm not a better interviewer. I work really, really hard. Like, what we put into the show hopefully is reflected when you hear it, because it it's like, for me, the idea, and I've talked to you about this before, the idea that I would say to somebody, "Hey, listen to my show for an hour and a half." An hour and a half. Okay, How I Built This is about an hour and a half. It's a long time. And I'm saying to you, "Hey, listen to my show for an hour and a half. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be worth your time." That's a huge responsibility that I now have, because if I waste your time, I've stolen your time. And your time is so valuable. You are giving me your time, which is more valuable than money. And so I better give you a good product. Even though it's free, I still have to deliver something that is good for you, because you're giving me your time. And by giving me your time, of course, it helps us with advertisers, right? So every time I make an episode of How I Built This, I am like, how are we going to make sure this is the most useful, beneficial, valuable hour of someone's week? And that's what I'm up against. And that's what I'm trying to do, because we could just put 5 shows out a week, or 10 shows out a week, and it would be much, much more challenging to hit the same level of quality that we hit. You can absolutely make a high quality show every day, and there are lots of shows that do that. It's just really hard. And so when you think about all of the things out there, usually the shows that are the best and that are the most interesting and valuable are the ones where they're really working hard on making it great.
Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on, and we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, and it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody. Well, and I hope that the market rewards and validates what you're saying. Here's some of my fears. You brought up Netflix, right? Which started when they started going into original content. It was like House of Cards. And now it's like the Paul Tyson fight, right? Where it's just like, okay, now we're going to spoon feed just the lowest common denominator of content for the sake of getting your attention, and whether or not it's an honest trade, we're going to try to hang on to it as long as we can. And I think some of the concern, and I don't want to sound too crotchety on this, like kids these days, right? But when you get into this world of visual and it starts to erode and compete with the value of the theater of the mind that you were describing earlier, which I agree can be held with video, but when we're catering to video and catering to the clips, are we in jeopardy of really diluting the thing that is special about this? And I wonder if, because the money seems like it's moving to favor what can be done in the short form, if there's a trade that's being forced on all of us to some extent to keep up with that. And so it's about, how do we balance that into the future?
It's interesting because I think there's a short answer and a long answer. And the short answer is I don't think we can control that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a free society with free marketplaces, and the market ultimately determines the ways that some of these things shake out, right? So like people watch the Tyson Paul fight because lots of people want to watch it, right? And or other content that might just go viral because there is a huge audience for it. Whether it's what you might want to watch or what I might want to watch doesn't matter. The flip side of it is that I think that consistency matters, right? Like I do think that there are always going to be periods of time where for a moment like it will seem like this is what everybody is doing or this is what everybody wants, or I remember and I've seen this in waves in podcasting. I remember back when I started, there were plenty of shows that were really hot that are some of which don't exist anymore. There was a lot of talk about true crime. True crime is a really great and popular genre, but for a while that was what everybody was kind of focusing on. And I remember getting people coming to me saying, "You should start a true crime podcast." And my response was, you know, it's just not my thing. It's not my passion. And so it would be totally contrived for me to do that. I think I could probably make a decent one, but it wouldn't be as good as Criminal or some of these, in the dark, some of these other shows, because that's not the world I come from. I think that what I have found, even in the short time I've been in podcasting since 2012, is consistency matters. You might see ebbs and flows, and you might see other trends rise and fall, and you should definitely kind of keep tabs on them. Like video, I think is a really interesting trend. But when it comes to like um, just following the sort of what seems to be cool at the moment, um, it might work in the short term, and it could be very lucrative in the short term. But the reality is, like, if you are consistent, I think, and you continue to make content that people find valuable, that a critical mass of people find valuable, you will find that over time, that's probably the best approach. It's sort of like you can make a bunch of money and by picking stocks and getting lucky and picking the right stock and then selling it. And you can also do pretty well if you just stick your money in index funds and just add to it every week
Yeah.
over time. Like in 30 years, you're like, wow, that was pretty great. So I understand this impulse to sort of say, well, is it being diluted? But at the same time, I react sort of I have a visceral reaction to it, because I remember being an upstart when I was 21, 22 in the industry. And I remember how people would react to the way I would report when I was writing articles and trying to be funny or clever and stupid too. I think that it's any of these industries will change and evolve, and people will come into it, and people will say and do things that it's not my cup of tea, but it's just part of the evolution.
Yeah.
you know
Well, and I appreciate that perspective, especially as somebody that's not only built their own successful organization or organizations, but who studies professionally people that have been, just the idea of focus on the work, keep your head down, make a great product, and the scoreboard will catch up, right? Which is comforting. I want to pivot to another challenge, and it ties back to something you said at the top of the discussion, which is that you weren't picked for this. And what's amazing is that so many of the kind of institutions in this medium, Rogan, Mark Maron, Mark Maron, it's funny because he was on one of the small radio stations we had in LA that was failing miserably. And we were trying to sell spots on his show for $25. People didn't want them, and he went to podcasting and picked himself, and he became a king, right? And I think that was the renaissance, right? That was what was so beautiful about this, is you didn't need the program director's approval. You could just create. And that was in a very decentralized ecosystem that doesn't quite exist in the same way today. Now, technically, yes, anybody can, do a podcast on their phone, and through the meritocracy of it, in theory, they can be successful. But the machinery it takes to promote and to get and to stand out from 6 million other programs, that's potentially a new dynamic. And so do you see, with the kind of consolidation of distribution and and how much content is truly available that you have to fight through, is the meritocracy that potentially was the refining fire that made it what it was, is that changing and potentially snuffing out otherwise really good content creators who may not be playing the game that a few corporations need them to play?
It's a really interesting question, and it's interesting because you could argue that podcasting emerged in response to this world of gatekeepers
Right.
and distribution and control of distribution, right? Like when I started out as a reporter in 1998, you could not get on the air without the approval of reams and levels of editors and a bureaucracy. I mean, for me as a 22-year-old to get onto NPR, 23, 24, it was virtually impossible. I
I don't
mean,
know how you did it.
it
Yeah.
was so hard. You had to convince somebody that you had a legitimate report, and then that they would even give you the time of day. You were so young. It was a completely different world. To get in when I went to CNN, it was like it was unbelievable. I was on television, but like by that point, I had already all this reporting experience under my belt in radio, and so podcasting really was a kind of reaction to that. It was like a step above ham radio operators at the time,
Right.
when it started, and
Exactly.
and or low power FM,
Yeah.
and and really that it succeeded for a long time. It allowed people like Joe Rogan and Mark Maron, to really, and Adam Carolla, and others, to really grow incredible businesses independently without the backing of major organizations. And inevitably, when there's a successful industry, the established players start to perk up and say, wait a minute, there's an opportunity for us here. And I think that that's probably what, the shift that we are now in the middle of, where you have big players who are established in the industry, in film and media, and are now calling the shots. And I think that is a natural sort of a natural evolution. You can apply this to any industry. You can apply this to the railroads in the United States.
Hmm.
Railroads were started by individuals, and sort of these yahoos, and then eventually got consolidated. Banks, Wells Fargo, American Express, all of these organizations that are like that sort of are pillars of. They were started by people going to California and trying to make some money off the gold rushers, right? And so the question is, what's going to be the next kind of shock to the system? What's going to be the next, the next sort of platform or distribution opportunity that's going to challenge that? I mean, I think to some extent YouTube, TikTok, some of these places they're still and even podcasting, there's still plenty of opportunities to to create your own audience. But to me, it's sort of the story of America.
Hmm.
It's like,
Yes, yes, yes.
and so it's not, to me, it's not good or bad. It's what happens, and then out of that, people get frustrated and start something new, to
Yeah.
challenge it.
Yeah. Well, okay, and I think that brings us back to our core question, and I know you're running out of time. Um, but the definition, um, in your view, what is a podcast today in 2025?
I think a podcast is a form of content that provides information to um, to audiences that are seeking that information out. It's a it is a an audio and now video platform that allows people to amplify ideas and messages and thoughts in a way that reaches people without the guardrails that have existed traditionally in American media and global media.
So one of the distinctive pieces of what you just said, and that I think is kind of unique from some of the other answers I've heard, is the idea that without guardrails for who can create and who can consume, and that's the meritocracy thing, which may get clouded by competition. It may get clouded by people with bigger instrumentation and promotional capabilities. But at the end of the day, I think you just kind of alluded to it previously. It seems like the fact that you still don't need the program director's approval to do it is a distinctive factor. But now the second question is really hard, which is, does it need or deserve, or is it worth protecting what we think of as a podcast and the kind of audio first definition of that, and keeping it distinct from all the video that's created, also without guardrails? Is that important?
I mean, it's important for a certain subset of people. I would include myself among those who love audio as a medium, but I'm not sure that it can be protected. I'm not sure you can build a moat around it, because ultimately you're going to isolate those that kind of content from the wider environment. I don't think it's about, should we protect the, let's call it the integrity or whatever you want to call it about podcasting. It's more like, how is the industry evolving? And it is evolving in a way that reflects market demand, that reflects what some people want to listen to. And again, some of it I like, some of it I don't like, but to me that's not what matters. What matters is what's happening, and how can I observe it, learn from it, maybe participate in some of it, and maybe some of it won't be for me or for other podcasters. But I don't at the end of the day, I don't think that sort of codifying or trying to formally like preserve and protect what some of us might think of as traditional podcasting is really worth our time, because it's an evolving medium like any medium. And I think that there are things about it that we will look back on in 20 years and say, "Oh, those are the good old days," and things that are, we'll look at it and say, "Well, that it's much better." I can look back on my career working at CNN, NPR, and I can easily tell you, Dan, the golden age was, 2005 to 2010, or 2000 to 2010. And sometimes, I might think that, but also as a consumer of media today, the options are endless. At the click of my fingers, I can access so much information, and I don't think I would trade that for the golden age, or the so-called golden age. And so I think that podcasting will get better in many ways, and in some ways it'll get worse, but that's okay too. I think at the end of the day, it is what it is, and our job as people in the industry, as content creators, is to understand that we can make the contributions that we can make, and hopefully the kinds of things that I make, and others that I've mentioned make, will continue to appeal to people.
And I really appreciate the optimism and also the acceptance of how the world changes, and that it doesn't matter what we think about the wind, we just have to adapt to it, right? And I guess the kind of last piece of this I want to get your take on is, but does the labeling matter? Is it worth fighting for the label so that it doesn't, well, I'm giving away one potential reason to, but I think one of the leading arguments is so it doesn't get washed away in the other iterations, which of course need to exist. But do you preserve the brand of it as a distinguishing factor of the work that you create?
I don't know. I mean, I think podcasting is it's a useful tool because it's a shorthand now. Like, you don't have to explain it anymore to people, and it can mean many things to different people.
Yeah.
To some people it can mean, someone in their basement, just hitting the record button and talking through their iPhone. And there are certainly podcasts that I listen to that sound like that. Um,
Yeah.
and some that are in professional studios like this one. But it's a useful shorthand. So I don't have, much sort of thought about whether it's important to change that idea or that term or to preserve it. It will become something that is different than what it was originally. But remember, what it was originally was you and me taking an iPod and plugging it into our computer and downloading some weird
It was horrible.
thing. And what it is
Yeah.
now is much better than what it was then. And hopefully, what it will be in 10 or 15 years will even be better than what it is now.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a wonderful perspective. It's challenging. I think because I'm looking at the business end of this thing, it feels important because people need to make decisions about it. Advertisers need to figure out, are they allocating budget toward this thing, or does it all become something else? But also, I do want to see us continue to carve out and shine a spotlight on the essence of what brought us here that I hope continues. And that is that potential for inspiration, that theater of the mind that other media platforms and types have had a hard time replicating. And I hope we get to keep some of that essence, even as all the options continue to fragment.
Yeah.
So
And I will just say, one thing about that, which is increasingly, I think, and hope that advertisers will also look at who is delivering the message.
mhm.
Is the biggest, sort of the person reaching the biggest audience, the right person? And sometimes they might be. Sometimes it might fit in with what you're trying to sell, but sometimes it might not be. And so I think that people who, again, really care about the craft and about the audience and about delivering something that's valuable to people or that people find valuable, whether it's politics or, business or comedy or true crime or, psychology or inspiring stuff or storytelling. Like, it doesn't matter what the category is, but the people making the content and delivering the message, I think will continue to, I think already matter and will continue to matter more.
And I think that's a great place to park it, because this is an ongoing conversation, and I hope that for many years to come, you and I get to keep having it. So thank you for what you do for all of us, and your generosity here, as you have with your audience consistently. Really appreciate your contribution to this field.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for what you've done for the industry, and it's great to talk to you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for giving us your time on the Media Roundtable, and may the discussion continue. And special thanks again to Guy, Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, Sean, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly, everyone. That was another conversation from our full series, What's a Podcast? And whether you're a podcaster, an advertiser, or somebody who just cares about this space, I hope this stretched you. It's certainly stretched me, and is giving us a lot to think about in how we want to live going forward and protect and preserve the essence of the medium while preparing for the changes we need to make to evolve on the road ahead. If you want to hear the full limited 3-part docuseries, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined, check it out wherever you listen to your shows. But if you want to go beyond that and you want to be a part of the movement that we've got here, it's not just about our defining it. It's about figuring out a path forward. Go to our link in the show description and download our free white paper, What is a Podcast? That has research from over 4,000 Americans on what consumers believe that the industry is. And make sure you sign our petition, also available in the link in the show description, to keep podcasting open. This show is not just about content, learning, or entertainment. This is about having a real effect in the real world on issues that are important to all of us. We hope you'll continue to be a part of it and bring this into real life. Go to oxfordroad.com for more resources, or click the links in the show description. Thanks for your time.